So in this segment, we need to take some time to talk about some of the influential people in economics. We've talked about a lot of the ideas of some of these guys in chapters 1 and 2. We've mentioned Aristotle, but he's a very ancient Greek thinker. When economics really became codified, as far as in a written book form, we want to look at someone named Adam Smith. He is considered like the grandfather of economics, the one who really started the whole study. And he was doing his studies in the late 1700s there, and he published his first book, The Wealth of Nations, in 1776. Now, if you notice, that's a very influential date because that was the foundation of our country, the United States of America. And so all of our founding fathers were reading this book and had the ideas floating around that Adam Smith was discovering at that time. So when Adam Smith published his book, it became like the bestseller, and that's what the United States of America patterned itself on with our founding fathers. Okay? So in The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith posed a question that he set out to answer, which was, why are some countries rich and some countries poor? And many people had different explanations. They would say, oh, it's just fate, or they would say, well, we're just a superior people and they're an inferior people, and those are the reasons. And Adam Smith said, no, it has nothing to do with things like race or culture or, anything like that. I want to find the key ingredient. And so in his research, what he discovered was the number one thing to wealth is how much entrepreneurship does a country have and how much does it allow in its laws. An entrepreneur, if you remember, is someone who takes a risk to make a profit. All right? They have to be able to take a risk to make a profit. So they might fail. Bill Gates could have failed. I'm sure some people have failed at making computers. He was able to succeed, so that's why we know him so well. We don't really write down in the history books all the times people failed at things, but that's a possibility. An entrepreneur takes a risk to make a profit. Okay? And if you allow entrepreneurship, if you've got people constantly taking risks, trying to find a good product, a good service, a good way of doing things, those things rise to the top and they become part of your society. And pretty soon you have all these different inventions. And that's what Adam Smith called capital. And that's why people have adopted the idea of buying, selling, and trading in the most efficient way. We call it capitalism. Okay? So that's when it was first sort of put into words. And that's where the idea of capitalism comes from. Because if you increase your stock of capital, you increase your stuff, you can then grow more stuff with more stuff with more stuff. So he said it became sort of an exponential thing that just gathered steam upon itself. And entrepreneurship leads to wealth. A second thing that he was really promoting is that incentives matter. People do things for a reason. And specifically, when he was talking about entrepreneurs, he has a famous quote. He says, "It is not from the benevolence or love of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we should expect our dinner, but their regard to their own self-interest." And that's still true today. The people who own restaurants in the Dalles, you go out to eat there, they're very nice. And they will serve you just about anything you want because what is motivating them is money. It's not a love for you. They aren't sitting there saying, oh, I wish that person could come in and I could just serve them. Nope. To be honest, they really don't care. But they will be willing to care and they will be willing to serve you if you bring in the money. Okay? So it is their own self-interest to get food on their table, to put their kids through college, to have a house, to buy a car. It is their own self-interest that causes them to act in these very serving ways to try and get you to bring your service in and give them your money. All right? So incentives matter. And in order to have entrepreneurship, and in order to have these incentives that motivate people, Adam Smith said you have to have private property. That's what allows both to function. In order to do these things, you have to have private property. Because who's going to take a risk? First, if you don't have anything, you can't risk what you don't have. Second, if you do take a risk and you don't get the rewards from it, then what's the point in taking the risk? So no king, lord, noble would ever take a chance at losing their wealth. They have nothing to gain. They already have it. And business is stifled and things don't grow. And so some countries suffered tremendously, but those that did well allowed private property. That's the British. and other countries there that became wealthy, entrepreneurship and incentives were allowed to work. So you have to have private property in order for people to be able to buy, sell, and trade and take a risk with what they have. All right? And that's the final thing that Adam Smith said, was that humankind is an animal that makes bargains. No other animal does this. There is no exchange of bones between dogs. We are unique in that way that we make contracts and bargains. We make deals with people for things. We engage in trade in order to make our lives better. And in order to have something to trade, you have to own it before you can trade it. All right? So that's Adam Smith. He's considered sort of the grandfather of economics, is what most people call him. He's sort of foundational as he starts this line of study, and it expands out from there. His follower there, David Ricardo, the next generation of economists. David Ricardo published his book in 1815, and that's called Principles of Economy and Taxation. All right. So he's furthering the studies of Adam Smith and adding to economic thought. We're going to study his thoughts in chapters 4 and 15. We've already touched on it in chapter 1, the law of diminishing marginal returns. This is David Ricardo. So he is the one that came up with that. And if you remember, every time you consume something, it adds to your happiness, but as you consume more and more, it adds less and less happiness. So diminishing marginal returns, that is David Ricardo. That's amazing addition to economic thought. Also, he demonstrated the mathematics of comparative advantage, and that's what's going to be in the next lesson, because it was an absolutely revolutionary idea that was grabbed hold of, especially by the United States of America and its rise to power, is this idea of comparative advantage as opposed to absolute advantage. And we're going to see that in the next lesson. So most of chapter 4 is going to be all about comparative advantage. And if you can grasp that concept, you will have grasped a very powerful tool. The final thing that he added was something called rent seeking, and we're not going to get into that until chapter 6. Okay? So these are two of the foundational thinkers in economics, and the things that they added are extremely important. We're going to be adding more to this list of foundational thinkers as we go through the series here. Okay? So we're going to start with these two. Thanks.